Are you guys ready? Just 1 second. We're making sure everything's all synced up.
You're visible. I'm
Okay.
presuming you're live. Yeah, I can see the red light.
All right. Well, good morning. So, Odessa Wesleyan Church, this is our journey through the Bible on this beautiful winter morning. If you are in the southern tier of New York, you are getting pouring down rain, sleet, snow, repeat, wind since this morning. If not, send nice weather this way. So this morning we are in the book of Nehemiah, and we're going to focus there. So I know we kind of fast forwarded a little bit last week, and we're going to kind of make the turn here back to the timeline. It was just how things were working out and planning and everything that just didn't work out quite how we expected it. So remember that under Cyrus's leadership, who was the emperor of the Persian Empire, he made a decree that the Jewish exiles would be allowed to go back to their homeland, what we would call the Holy Land today. We would call Israel. We would call, in the New Testament times, we would call Judea, Galilee, that area, to go back to build homes and basically to live there. And so that happened. There was actually 3 different returns that happened over, the next years. And this was a fulfillment of the prophecies that were made with Isaiah and Ezekiel, that after a 70-year time period, the Jewish people would be allowed to come back. Their time of punishment had ended for their sinfulness or their disobedience and their breaking of the covenant that God had made with them. So Ezra at some point was a priest, that he also was some type of government official within the Persian Empire. That Ezra had sought permission to go back because he had heard the people had cleared out the foundation of the destroyed temple and put an altar, but they hadn't started to build the temple even after the emperor had given them the funds, given them the articles that were taken under Nebuchadnezzar's destruction of Israel. He had taken all the articles of worship and put them in like a storage house as a gift to his gods. Well, then Cyrus said, take this stuff back and use it to worship your God once again. That's what it was intended for. So they had this, but they weren't building the actual building of the temple. So Ezra heard this, and I think there was 2 things. Yes, he was inspired by God to do this, but I think also, if you think about it, when the emperor, and it's a little bit different than being in a democratic republic like we are, when the government gives you money, and you're a dictator, emperor, that's what they were, you better spend it or else he's going to take it back and may punish you. And what's a dictator or an emperor's favorite punishment? You get a haircut starting at your shoulders and straight across, not up and down. So I think that was the other thing. So Ezra goes back and he calls the people, God is restoring our nation. And the central thing of our nation is that we have this temple. We need to rebuild this temple. So we looked a couple weeks ago about how the people gathered together, they built the temple. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. And here's the thing. When you read Ezra, you read Nehemiah, and you read the Chronicles, there's some spots that almost read pretty close word for word. So we know that this was happening. So Nehemiah is a contemporary of Ezra. Nehemiah is inspired to do the next big thing, to establish nationhood once again. And so we'll see that Ezra and Nehemiah, and one thing you'll see in Nehemiah is Nehemiah's account here reads more, yes, it mentions a lot of God, but it reads more like a historical writing. And actually, as you read it, the biblical scholars have agreed that it's almost like a report back to the king that Nehemiah writes. And we've seen this before. Remember the first words of the Gospel of Luke. Luke was writing to an official in the Roman Empire explaining the way. And he started first with his gospel explaining this man, Jesus Christ, and then all of a sudden his followers were disrupting, the Jewish people, the Roman Empire of the time. And then in Acts, he continues talking about how this way starts to turn into another religion, basically, another spiritual movement, and about this guy, Paul, which scholars believe that was written as maybe kind of a unsubtle defense of Paul, because Paul was going through multiple trials in front of Caesar himself, and he was talking about Paul's life. So this is kind of a common thing. So this is where the Bible is really neat. The Bible isn't just like a whole bunch of rules and regulations. The Bible is historical. We've seen, Psalms about worship. We've seen, practical advice, in the in Proverbs. We've seen the celebration of love and a godly mindset between a man and a woman. We see all sorts of things in the Bible. That's where the Bible is so neat, because if you just say, well, it's just about this big guy in the sky throwing lightning bolts when I mess up. Again, that's not it. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So even though you don't see a lot of specificity of how, you see Yahweh working through people, through pagans, unbelievers, through people who were 100% obedient, you see God doing great things. So Nehemiah 1:1. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakkalah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was at the citadel of Suda, Hananiah, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men. And I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that has survived the exile, and also Jerusalem. So the 20th year. Well, let me go back. Something I didn't put in the notes that I just picked up. They did. The citadel of Susa. What is that? That's one of the homes of the emperor of Persia. So we know that Nehemiah was living in the capital, one of the capital cities. They had multiple because the Persian Empire was so big, unlike you would see in the Roman Empire, that where Rome was the center, and we've seen this develop over human history since then. The Persian Empire was so large that they had multiple capitals where the king would go and live there for a while, but he would leave higher officials to make decisions in this section. And then he would go over here and visit this section. Then he would go here. So Nehemiah is there, and these other men come from, there are some of the exiles that were allowed to return. They come back, and Nehemiah says, hey, how's things going in our homeland? Now, the 20th year, there's a debate. Is it the 20th year of the emperor? Is it the 20th year of Nehemiah's life? Is it the 20th year since the altar was rebuilt and restored? Is it the 20? We don't know what this 20th year is, because the aggravating thing with the ancients up until, I would say accurately, probably the last 600 years, human beings have been, we'll say on, April 19th, 2026 in Odessa, New York at 10 o'clock in the morning, Pastor Brian said this. The ancients were basically in the 20th year. Well, whose 20th year are we talking about? So again, That's a little one of those critiques where our friends, the biblical critics, will bring up about the Bible. And that's another argument. Say, we don't know. They weren't concerned about time. They were concerned about God and their relationship with God. And God being eternal, again, we've seen in the prophecies, God didn't say, hey, Jewish people, at this time, this place, this year, this month, the Babylonians are going to come in and destroy your nation. But at this time, this place, exactly 70 years from now, a guy, Cyrus, you've never heard of, is going to allow you to come back. God, being eternal, isn't concerned with them. As human beings, we're trapped in this temporal existence. All right. So most likely this is we know this is during Artaxerxes' reign. Artaxerxes is the grandson of Xerxes. I know we're going to be using a lot of words. What had happened? Okay, remember Nebuchadnezzar, and then his grandsons were rulers of the Babylonian Empire. They were defeated by Cyrus and Darius. Cyrus was a Mede. Darius was a Persian. They joined together to fight against their great enemy, the Babylonians, and won. One ruled for a little bit there, and another one ruled for a little bit. And then Cyrus had a son called Xerxes, and we talked about during our study of Esther about Xerxes. Then his son took over as emperor. His name was Artaxerxes. Okay, whatever. What would happen from this point on throughout the rest of the Persian Empire, the emperor would be Xerxes the first, Xerxes the second, Xerxes the third. Very much like King Edward the Seventh, Charles the Second now, that they would take on the name, or Caesar, as in Julius Caesar. Now, was Julius Caesar the ruler of the empire from the time he took over until the Roman Empire fell apart in the 4th, 5th century AD? Nope. But there was this title. And so Artaxerxes becomes a title. So again, the biblical critiques will say, well, the Bible doesn't know what they're talking about because they use this. Again, keep in mind, somebody Hebrew language, raised in Hebrew culture, living in Persia and trying to translate everything to everybody, again, with no thinking 5,000 years in the future. People sitting in Odessa, New York, and sitting online throughout the world right now, need to know. So again, so let's go back to the reading here. Verse 3. They said to me, these men that had come, and Nehemiah said, hey, how goes it? Those who survived the exile are back in the province and are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down. Its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. The importance of walls in the ancient world. And if you are looking online and through our YouTube and the various Facebook posts here, the title of today is Walls Are a Good Thing. Walls are good. The importance of walls in ancient world. One, they set the limits or the borders of the city. All right. Instead of today where we have, now even remember, the surveyors would go out. George Washington was a surveyor, that they would set markers. If you ever noticed driving around, you'll notice like concrete little slabs. Stop by one of them. Don't get hit. Stop by one of them. You'll see on one side, one up from my house, pointing this direction, says veteran. The other side says horseheads. What does that mean?
Says what?
Horseheads.
Horses.
To the north that's the border. From that point on, the town of Veteran. To the south, that point on is the town of Horseheads. We have marks defining what the town is. Ancient world, they built walls. That this is the city of Jerusalem. We know it because everything contained in it is the city of Jerusalem. Therefore, whatever the political leader was at the time, he had control of everything within that city. Everything outside the city, maybe somebody else, had it, or that was no man's land or whatever. Also, the importance of walls. That's the first line of defense. That if what they were concerned about was their temples, their seat of government, their storage houses, where their wealth was kept, that you kept it within protected walls. Sometimes that didn't work. The destruction of Jerusalem, right? How did the Persians and the Medes just defeat Babylon? Remember, we talked about that in Daniel. They tunneled underneath the walls and invaded the city. The walls are meant to protect you from intruders, but also to keep people out who shouldn't be there, and also to give protection of the people who live there. Now, here's the problem. That, again, the final theory of what the 20th year is probably this is the 20th year of the return of exile. That they had started, they were probably still in the process of building the temple, okay, clearing the rubble. But remember, the Babylonians destroyed the city. It became a pile of burnt and destroyed rocks. I'm not talking about they just blasted a hole someplace. They destroyed the city. Nothing left, no walls, and it's just piles of stone. You return to your city. Every day you get up to go about your daily chores. You go about your trades. You go to the rebuilt temple to worship God. And what do you walk by? Piles of rubble, which also represent past sinfulness and disgrace in front of God. And what do other people who don't really like you see? Oh, you say you're a city. Look at all this junk around you. You guys are living in a junkyard. You're living in a quarry. You're not a real city. So what had happened is this great amount of work to rebuild these walls wasn't done. The people looked to the first of clearing out the foundation of the old temple, setting up the altar. Good thing, right? Then rebuilding the temple, but also restoring their homes, the government, places of business, which is fine. That's what we would all do if we moved back to some place. Let's say, we were World War II, people who fled from the destruction that Nazi Germany had done on our town in France. What would we do? We would start clearing rubble. We'd first have places to live in. We would have places where we do our business in, right? We would do things, but eventually in the ancient world, a sign of a city is the wall. And it hadn't been done yet. And it was 20 years later where they had the opportunity. So Nehemiah is weeping. First of all, because they're called, what is Jerusalem? The city of Yahweh. Oh yeah, it has a great temple, but it's got all this destruction around it. It's giving shame to their God. It's giving shame to their people. And also, what did Cyrus do? And Xerxes and Artaxerxes and the following kings, they told him to rebuild the city. And they were. Nehemiah going, king's going to get wind of this, and eventually he's going to get ticked off. So, verse 4, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the Lord, the God of heaven. So, Nehemiah had emotional and spiritual reaction, and it was grief. We've come into that. We've come in to see times in our life where we've failed God. We've come to times when we see something, maybe somebody's struggling in their relationship with God. We've seen things, in our society that is dishonoring to godly principles. Our reactions, anger, grief, are natural. But what should be our next reaction after that? We seriously pray. Nehemiah, the inference here is that Nehemiah didn't just say, hey, God, we got to do something about these walls. Let me know. And go about his day. That Nehemiah fasted. That means that he denied himself food and sustenance to take that time and pray. He was intensely concerned and intensely wanted to communicate with God. You need to show us what to do. That this is honoring, this is obedience of your name, that you have by your grace. God didn't have to tell the people. Remember, they broke the covenant. And we've talked about this a whole bunch of times, that they broke the covenant. God didn't have to say, okay, you're allowed to come back to your land. But through his grace and his redemption, he allowed these people to come back. But yet they were kind of starting to slip again, kind of complacent. We used to use the word, Pastor Harry, remember, backsliding. You started to kind of return to your old ways. And Nehemiah's like, we've gone through this for 70 years, and now people are starting to kind of ignore. So he goes to God and prays. Well, then he goes about his life, but at the same time, he's thinking about this. I think he's thinking, and maybe he's just constantly praying to God. And his mind is set. Well, this is wrong. Something needs to be done. Now, a little side note here to Nehemiah. Nehemiah had a job, like many of us in the secular world. He was the cupbearer of the king. Okay, what does that mean? This is not a new term in the Bible, isn't it? Remember Joseph, the cupbearer and the baker? The cupbearer is the one that oversees the food for the king. Number one, you want to make sure the king likes his meal every day, right? Number two, what's the easiest way to assassinate a king? In his food. So what the cupbearer did, he wasn't just the one who, when the king says, hey, I want a glass of wine, the president, we know, has a button on his desk when he wants a Diet Coke because he really likes Diet Coke. He pushes the button and somebody brings him in a glass of Diet Coke. That wasn't just the role of the cupbearer. The cupbearer in front of the king tasted his food, tasted his wine. And then the king would stare at the cupbearer. If the cupbearer didn't drop dead, the king knew the food was safe. This is a very trusted individual, because if you're involved in an assassination plot as a cupbearer, you either got to be really committed to, because you're going to die tasting this food, so you're not going to be involved in this. But if the king all of a sudden dies of food poisoning or dies by poisoning, who's the first guy they're going to blame? The cupbearer. So this guy is very trusted. Now think of that. A Jewish descendant. Go back and think of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Think of Esther, Mordecai. All these people, these defeated people who were told, you're going to go in 70 years of exile. But remember, what Jeremiah said to them? Build houses, plant fields, marry, have children, give your children in marriage, and I will eventually bring you back. These Jewish people, even though their circumstances, because of their sinfulness, were put in a place where they didn't really like, they turned back to God, and God continually blessed them. And what was the result? We saw Mordecai, literally the prime minister, the head guy under the king. Daniel, the guy who 3 different kings called on for advice and was followed. these people, and Esther, the queen, the wife of the emperor, these people were just a tiny little fraction of the influence that the Jewish people had within the Persian Empire. So, a little note here I have that, hang on a second here. I skipped a page. I'm sorry. I'm like looking at this going, what am I doing? So, Nehemiah is here, standing and observing all the emperor's discussions. And all of a sudden, one day, the king looks over and says, in essence, in English, this is Pastor Brian's translation, "What's wrong with you?" Now, again, you're the king. Your cupbearer is sitting there and he looks sad and distressed. What are you thinking? What's this guy up to? Yeah. Because again, in the ancient world, and even up until recent human history, do you come in angry and sad and crying in front of the king? Mm-mm. Do you neutral face in front of the king? Mm-hmm. And so Nehemiah sitting here, and obviously his grief, his concern about this condition of the walls of the city of Jerusalem are so much that all of a sudden he's sitting here and the king goes, "Nehemiah, what's wrong?" You ever had that little skip in your heart? Oh, does Nehemiah say, "I'm fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine"? All of a sudden he realizes, because he's so spiritually in tune, because this is the thing with prayer. Don't just pray for something, look for God moving it. Because all of a sudden, did God in his voice or through an angel, or all of a sudden the skywriting saying, "Nehemiah, Artaxerxes is going to give you permission to go back and rebuild the wall today"? No. All of a sudden the king says, "What's wrong with you?" "Oh, king, how can I be happy? How can I be focused when my homeland is in disgrace?" Now, the king could have got a little ticked off, couldn't he? He said, "Wait a minute. I'm funding this for the last 20 years and they haven't done what yet?" Now, again, the area of Judea is like my pinky compared to an elephant that is the Persian Empire. Okay, the king didn't probably know everything, just like all of our leaders. Even the mayor of Odessa doesn't know what every citizen is doing at every minute of his term, right? So all of a sudden the king kind of gets this little reality check. What's going on? But again, God's hand moving. The king then says, "Okay, what do you want?" Nehemiah could have said, "Oh, what do you want?" Nehemiah said, "Me, your most trusted advisor, the one that tastes your food and ensures your safety, give me permission to go back and rebuild the walls." Pretty bold thing, isn't it? That you are here and you want to leave me? You want to resign? You know? Again, God moving in ways. And again, how God moves. We see him with a great pillar of fire and the cloud. We see him speaking to Elijah in the cave through fire and wind. We see him face to face with Moses. We see him working through Nehemiah's life by him simply praying and fasting and looking for an opportunity. And God uses him to influence the king. And so what happens? King says, "All right, go back, but report to me, and you're not released from this job yet. So eventually you're going to get recalled here." Look for opportunities to serve God. So many times we go about life and go, somebody has to, somebody should, somebody must. Remember the words of the Bible. Go back to Isaiah 6. Who shall I send? Isaiah is standing in the presence of God. Okay, I think he's talking to you. What did Isaiah say? Here I am, send me. Look for opportunities to serve God. Don't just pray. Don't just be grieved about the condition of your friend, of your community, whatever it may be that's causing you spiritual grief. Go to God in prayer, but look for God to place you where it needs to be. Because a lot of times somebody needs to do something about that. God goes, yeah, I saved you from your sin. I've given you the Holy Spirit. I've sanctified you and given you the power. You are called to be a minister for the gospel of Christ. It's not just those of us who have REV in front of their names. It's not just those of us who receive a paycheck from a congregation to stand in front of the people. We are the collection of ministers. We are the ones to make a difference in that little corner of the world that God has placed us in. So Nehemiah goes back to the homeland. And I like what Nehemiah did. Very smart how he did this. He just showed up one night. I don't know if there was letters sent ahead. The king did give him letters of authority, but Nehemiah didn't just all of a sudden pop up in the town square and say, hey, you dumbbells, you see the rubble, you lazy people, let's get to work. Nehemiah went around the city and saw the mess. And then he called the leaders, the priests, the secular leaders, the people together and said, God has placed it on my heart to do something. The king has given me permission. We need to do this. What was the people's reaction? Joy. You're right. We need to do this. So the people got together and they started to rebuild. Now here's a little problem. If you look at chapter 2, verse 10, when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that somebody had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. So, what you will have is 3 governors, because Judah had not been established as a province within the Persian Empire until Nehemiah was sent back. And the king decided, you know what? We're going to carve what was Israel out of these 3 provinces and restore Israel to a province. So number one, these guys are not happy because they're losing some of their influence because they shared overseas. Number 2, these people were descendants of the enemies of Judah. That Sanballat was a descendant of the Philistines. That Tobiah, the Ammonite, was a descendant of the Canaanites. And then eventually you'll see a third guy join who was, they call him an Arab. He is a descendant of the Arab nomadic tribes that eventually settled down. They were some of the ones, remember what the Assyrians did when they conquered Israel? Pulled the Jews out, sent other people down to inhabit the land. These guys have been living there for a few centuries. Kind of when the Babylonians did the exile, remember what did they leave an army to protect themselves? They leave police to protect themselves. They even leave a governor or a mayor to protect themselves. No, they left a few poor people. They took the elite, the rich, the educated, and whisked them off to Babylon. And then allowed the land to be fallow. And then over 70 years, think about it for a minute. That your next door neighbor, you've lived in a house for 70 years and the next door neighbor's house is empty. eventually somebody goes, will go in there and what we call today squatter. We have these things called squatter rights. That after a time period, you've been living in something, even though you didn't purchase it, it's kind of yours, especially if you've invested money into it. I don't recommend that. That was how a lot of the Louisiana Purchase was settled, is people would go and live there, and the government ruled if you built a house, if you cleared the land, if you could prove that, I believe it was like maybe 3 seasons of harvest or something like that. I can't remember. You didn't have to buy the land from the government. It was yours. And it maintained yours until you either sold it or you deserted it, somebody else did. This is what happened. These other people groups, as the Jews were no longer living in their land, come in, and all of a sudden now the king in far off, capital says, well, one, I've allowed these people to come back to their land. Oh, okay, well, whatever. I allowed them to clear some of the rubble, to build an altar. Now they're building a temple. Then they build all these homes. Okay, well, we're still their overlords. All of a sudden, the king says they're going to be a province and they can build walls. Well, how are we going to, threaten them? How are we going to come in and force them to pay taxes to us? How are we going to make them sign contracts with us? These guys were a little ticked off. Even though the Jewish people joyfully agreed to accept the task, we will face opposition. We'll face opposition within our families. We'll, first of all, face opposition within ourselves. You ever had that self-doubt when God has called you to do something or says you need to do something, and you have that self-doubt? Am I doing the right thing? Especially when you're in the middle of the task. Is this really what I should? I don't know. Is this too much for me? And then you have the same thing you can have within the Christian community sometimes. We like to bicker and argue and everything else sometimes. We're not perfect. We're allowing God to make us perfect, but sometimes we allow the humanness in there. But also you're going to face opposition from outside. This world is ruled by people who oppose the truth of Christ. And when you stand for Christ, thank God that some people realize I need Jesus as well. But there will always be an element that will reject that. And the more you live for Christ, the more you're going to face opposition. Yeah, that bugs you. Yeah, that depresses you. But realize if you are doing the right thing and following God, God will bless you. And God will give you the strength. And you may fight the fight to the very last breath of your life, but fight the fight. So these people stopped what they were doing. They stopped their business. They stopped all this stuff. And we're not talking like the carpenters and the stonemasons and the day laborers. We're talking the richest guy in the city, Ezra the priest. All these people gathered together and built a wall. And we're like, okay, cool. What the image I get, have you ever seen a Mennonite or an Amish barn raising?
Oh, yeah.
They could take a very, very large barn and they can build it in a day. It's amazing. That's almost the image that I have. That when people get together, they cooperate, they can do great things. So to give you some statistics here, to realize how big of a task it is and what these people did. Jerusalem at this time period was 220 acres. That was circumvented. The wall that would circumvent around was 2.5 miles long. Okay. So they're building a wall 2.5 miles long. This wall was between, at some places, 6.5 feet wide to 15 feet wide. Okay. Now you're getting how big the task is. Gets better. It stood as high as 23 feet tall, and including had 11 gates built it up. Okay. This was done with hand tools, unskilled labor, no loaders, no excavators, no concrete trucks. Okay. In the desert heat in 52 days. Think about that. Think about that. What they did. Now, how do you know that, Pastor Brian? What proof do you have? You notice it talks about in here the broad wall, or now as it known, the Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall still stands in Jerusalem to this day. That under the Roman Empire, in around 63 to 65 AD, a Jewish element rebelled against the Roman Empire, and the Romans came in and did the same thing the Babylonians did. They destroyed the city except for one wall. This day, two people right here have gone to the Wailing Wall. They can testify it's true. It's where Orthodox Jews will go on a daily basis, and they will pray to God for the restoration of Jerusalem. You can actually, there's holes in this wall. You can actually write prayers and stick it in there. And other people will come daily, come hourly, and they won't pull these pieces of paper out, but they will pray to God. Christians go there, Jewish people go there, all different denominations of Christianity go there. This is the wall that Nehemiah's people built. This still stands. Is a testament, again, we sin, God's grace and provision still exists. When God's children answer the call to live for him faithfully, I have this in capitals, bold, underlined, and in red with about 10 explanation points. So I guess that means it's supposed to be important. When God's children answer the call to live for him faithfully, nothing is impossible. Nothing is impossible. Keep saying that to yourself. Trust me, I've gone through a time, this last year has been a struggle, for me. And it was kind of like a light in my head one day. Okay, there's all this stuff going on, but nothing is impossible. Just trust me and live for me. So chapter 4. We notice here in chapter 4, they face more opposition. What was the solution? Pray, trust, obey, and repeat. I'm thinking for a minute here. You know what? We're right at our time. And the rest of my notes here, I don't want to gloss over it quickly. We're going to stop here at chapter 3. Next week, we're going to go 4 through chapter 9, 4 through the end of Nehemiah. We're going to finish the story. But the message I want to leave with you today, start building the wall. Start the task that God has for you. Yes, there's rubble. Yes, there's destruction. Yes, it seems daunting. God's calling you to do something. Do it. Start it. God will work through you. Your heart is looking toward this God thing that we've been talking about. Just reach out to God. He will answer the if onlys and what so's and how's and where's and what's and all that stuff. Just trust God territory. So like I said, next week we're going to do Nehemiah 4 through the end. Maybe Psalm 119. We'll see how, as I review this a little bit more. All right. Psalm 119. But we'll do at least Nehemiah 4 through 9. Because like I said, I want to emphasize some stuff out of there. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for your grace and your forgiveness when we fail. Thank you that your grace and your forgiveness not just takes away our guilt, but it restores us to a life. And yes, that sometimes we're reminded by the rubble that we created in our life. But God, you have a place, you have a task, you have a calling for all of us. It doesn't matter if we're professional clergy, it doesn't matter if we have served you for decades, it doesn't matter if we're not even yours yet, if we're just still struggling with this. You call us to yourself. You have a purpose for our lives. Help us not just see it, help us to accept it, and help us to live it. In your name, amen. All right, folks, you have a good week, and we'll talk to you next week.